Hi, Mallory.
Hi, Allen.
Thanks for hosting here at Stat Wellness in this beautiful new space.
Of course, we're happy to have you. What a pleasure.
This is fantastic, and I'm excited for Framework members to be able to check this out. Do you want to introduce yourself and Stat a little bit?
I'm Mallory. I'm a nurse practitioner here at Stat Wellness on our national location. So we are the first out-of-state location. We have 3 other locations within Georgia, and then we have 1 location in North Carolina.
Amazing. And I had the pleasure of hosting Kristen, who's Stat's founder, and Ashley and a couple of other Stat folks. I think even before this place opened, you guys did a little community building thing over at Framework. We sat in the sauna and talked about the health benefits of sauna and cold plunge and did all of that together. So this feels great and exciting to be sitting here in the space that you guys were building out then. My name is Allen Penn. I'm the founder of Framework. We're a sauna and cold plunge studio with a social focus. We have a location in Wedgwood, Houston, just kind of down the road here, and a new location recently announced in East Nashville as well.
Exciting.
The goal here today is talk a little bit about the interaction between sauna and cold plunge and science. Specifically, what happens to your body and some of the biomarkers that sort of give you the indication of what's happening in your body when you sauna and cold plunge. And I think we all believe that there's a lot of benefits there from a health standpoint. But sometimes measuring those kind of things is a little tricky. And so that's the goal here, is to try to measure that. And we've put together a partnership between Stat and Framework whereby anyone, but Framework members specifically, can get not only a great deal, but a really kind of regimented program where you get a baseline blood draw with a handful of biomarkers, lab tests that we'll talk about here today. And then you'll do your thing at Framework and sauna and cold plunge. And then we'll come back a couple months later and test again and try to see what's changed. That's kind of how we can tell what's going on, I think. So that's the goal of what we put together. And today, what I'd love to talk about with you and learn from you is what's going on in your body when you sauna and cold plunge. Like, what's some of the science stuff that we understand? What does that mean from a health and medical standpoint? And then we'll talk a little bit about what those biomarkers are. That I think will be educational for everybody, no matter whether you're kind of going through this program or not. But maybe to start, what do you hear from patients? What's on their minds when they start to think about the health benefits of sauna and cold plunge? Like, how does that sort of show up in your practice?
Yeah, so we actually talk about that a lot in the space of just like building resiliency, especially when we talk about our patients that like are adrenally driven or cortisol driven. So that's a really common denominator amongst a lot of our patients, are like, what are some things that I can do to build that resiliency over time? So we talk a lot about what's called hormesis, which is like small bouts of exposure to stressors in the body that lead to an overall like buildup and toleration. So some of those things could be intermittent fasting. It could be going through like cold plunge, sauna, something that's like an immediate stress to the body, but over time will kind of build that tolerance.
Maybe we talk about stress for a second.
Yeah.
I think that word has such a connotation, maybe a misunderstood one. How do you talk about stress and this idea of like good stress or bad stress?
Yeah, I definitely preface with the fact that like not all stress is bad stress. Like we need stress. Like our cortisol is like the major player in for example, like I know a lot of people have heard about like fight or flight, right? So if there's like an immediate danger, we need cortisol to be jumping into action to shunt blood sugar, like glucose, into our muscles for us to make a quick getaway. So it's one of the
maybe
most
like how
primal...
I felt before I walked on here and had to get filmed, right?
Exactly. I'm not sweating. Just kidding. But it's like one of our most like primal and innate responses in the body. So like we really want to harness that, and it comes in with a lot of good. I talk about just like the natural progression of cortisol awakening response in the morning. Like we need cortisol upon waking, or else it's like we're in that constant battle of, I don't want to get out of bed. I'm going to hit snooze. I'm going to hit snooze. So like we really do need that gentle rise. And then throughout the day, it responds to like what our actions are, what are we eating, and really reflecting back on like how's our recovery, which is another really big buzzword when we talk about sauna cold plunge.
And when you're talking to patients about stress and cortisol and things like that, what role does sauna and cold plunge play? And there may be other markers besides cortisol that are worth kind of talking about here, even before we get into the nitty gritty details of a lab panel.
Yeah. So when we talk about just like overall, like kind of big picture cardiovascular health, so cardiovascular health is the number one like killer, like cardiovascular disease worldwide, globally, and in the US specifically. So things that we can do on like an everyday type regimen to help improve cardiovascular health as a whole is huge. Yeah. So big things that we kind of think about in that space are going to be inflammation. It's a huge driver. Metabolic health, making sure we have good like insulin sensitivity. Yeah. Are we able to use our food as fuel appropriately? Are we overfueling? Are we underfueling? Are we getting good sleep hygiene, making the most of our sleep? So a lot of things go into play in addition to just like some of the extra lifestyle modifications that we can make.
Yeah. Talking about cardiovascular health, that's maybe the reason that I personally got into regular sauna usage about 3 years ago, and specifically starting Framework, because I read a research paper that went through the fairly well demonstrated, longitudinal study, large population, benefits to cardiovascular health from regular sauna usage. And it was something like a 25 to 50% reduction if you used it 2 times compared to 1 time, or 5 to 7 times compared to 1 time. So even if you're already using it, using it more frequently, meaning usage kind of like 170, 180, 190 degrees, so pretty hot, and 15 to 25 minute sessions a couple times a week. Yeah. And 50% reduction in cardiovascular disease risk is massive.
Huge.
Right? Like people are taking statins for like single digit percentage reductions, right? Yeah. And so that was a big one for me. The other ones that we talk a lot about, Alzheimer's and dementia, stroke, and hypertension. Yeah. So those are sort of the 4 things that when we talk about the health benefits of sauna, on Framework's website, we have a whole science section with links to these studies that we sort of rely on. That's one of the things that got me into it. So I think there's this whole bucket of long-term health benefits, right? Like you don't get that one from a single sauna session. Yeah. You're going to get that from, months and years of that practice. But I think, some of these biomarkers might be more short-term, right? I would imagine that over a shorter period of time, you could see some benefits to something like cortisol.
Definitely. And what's super interesting too, when we talk about like hormesis or like the immediate stress for the long-term good, you can see fluctuations like transiently in these lab markers, like in the moment or like a couple hours to follow, but the long-term benefits is sort of like that sweet spot of like what we're trying to get at. So like you said, maybe introducing these practices like once or twice, like sure, we'll see jumps in these biomarkers like immediately, but to really like redeem those long-term benefits, it needs to be frequent exposure in like a regimented protocol. And I always say you can have too much of a good thing. Yeah. And I know that we'll probably talk a little bit about like how these protocols were structured and under what understanding is like too much. So I think that's something I talk a lot with patients about too, because I have a lot of like high performing, just like on a big scale, like work, athletics, like they often don't like recovery is not something they like constantly fuel that bucket. So for them, I think really honing in on the fact that like rest recovery is like equally as important. Moments of stillness to accommodate something like this is important.
What are some of the different profiles of people and patients that you see, and the ways in which you see them maybe using something in this recovery category, like hot and cold usage, right? So you have, athletes, somebody maybe training with like a physical goal. You have people that are thinking about biohacking and longevity. You have folks that are maybe managing existing conditions. Yeah. Like how does hot and cold maybe show up a little bit differently for different profiles like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know that you can definitely talk more about this too, but in the space of just like training. So because we are in medicine and movement practice, we do have a lot of people who have like body composition goals that they're reaching for, or just like athletes in general, and they're looking to like optimize their performance. So for those patients that are looking to increase muscle mass, we kind of talk about structuring and implementing cold plunge and sauna in a little bit of a different way. Yeah. We want to make sure that we're maximizing on hypertrophy. So we want to avoid cold plunge like immediately after Exercise. I know you and I talked a little bit,
Yes.
Leading into maybe introducing cold plunge prior to engaging in some pretty intensive strength work, just to minimize the heat index in the actual muscle and avoid like fatigue early on. For patients that are looking for overall vascularity, decreasing dementia risk, decreasing blood pressure, we talk about it and maybe using it as more like contrast, potentially introducing something like cold, waiting a couple minutes, then doing something hot. So you're mimicking like vasoconstriction, vasodilation. And so you're actually mimicking pumping essentially in the body. And then for mood, that's a huge one too. So I know you know this, but just as far as like cold plunge in general and sauna, you kind of get like that release of endorphins or like that feel good, like runner's high. So like that's a huge one for our patients too, to like start the day on that positive
So
note.
the numbers on that, it's a 250% increase in dopamine from something like 60 to 90 seconds of cold water exposure, where cold really only needs to be about 60 degrees or colder. So like you don't have to be the maximalist in the 30s. You get the same benefit. And it's over such a short period of time. So 250% increase in dopamine, 500% increase in adrenaline. I'm not aware of anything out there that in a couple of minutes is that impactful. And this is healthy dopamine, like without getting into too much of the detail, like the other things that would spike your catecholamines that much are not good for you. Like think drugs, and they go way up and they go sharply down and you feel real bad. Cold plunge curve is different for dopamine. It's a much slower tail off. And so you come back to a baseline over hours. And that's a remarkable way, to your point, to start the day. And what a powerful sort of hack, if you will, to do so.
Tell me a little bit about framework in general. Like, what are some things that would kind of set you guys apart from like somebody trying to do this at home or mimic these regimens at home with like like the body bag, like saunas or like something like that?
I think the important things, first of all, I think similar to exercise, the best hot and cold exposure that you can get is the one that you can actually do. Right. And so this is harder with hot because all of the research generally requires a pretty high temperature. I referenced this earlier, but many of the studies were out of Europe, 80 degrees centigrade, which is about 180 Fahrenheit. There's nothing in your house aside from a sauna that's going to get you that hot. A traditional sauna, meaning there's a stove with rocks and the room gets really hot. Like that heat mechanism is the only thing that we have and know of that can get that hot. And it seems like the science points us to, you need to be pretty hot like that. Like hotter than a desert would be, hotter than an infrared sauna would be, hotter than a steam room would be. Steam room's about 100 degrees because it's 100% humidity. So the heat part's really hard to get at home is the first thing I would say. And so we have traditional saunas and then we pair them with cold plunge. Cold is easier to do at your house. A little hard in the summer in Nashville. But like in the wintertime, the groundwater will be cold enough that your shower could get down sub 60 degrees. And a cold shower is hard. For those of us who have tried it. I think a cold plunge is easier than a cold shower.
You do. What's the mindset behind that? Maybe you're just more prepared.
Once you're in a cold plunge, you're there. So all you have to do is not move. I think there's more like choices that you're making. Think about like, wait, is my head under? Should my head be under? Ooh, it's really cold when it goes to my neck. Maybe I move a little bit this way. But then am I getting enough benefit? Like you're just making all these choices. And you have a really easy option to just move a little bit to make it easier. Once you're in that cold plunge, you get past the first 30 seconds and the good stuff cooks in, the dopamine and adrenaline, and you're kind of cruising. But I think so you can get cold exposure in the right situations at home. But I think that to your point, and you explained this better than I ever have before. So maybe if you don't mind saying that again about how hot and cold sort of play together. Because I think first of all, it feels really good, right? Like when you're hot, it feels good to cool down and vice versa. So there's just a basic element of like, it feels good and natural to kind of move from one to the next. But I've always sort of had this theory that, centering around what happens to your blood vessels that we know happens in hot, that we know happens in cold, and how those interact. So do you mind just saying that again? Because I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, of course. So definitely like during cold exposure, we're experiencing vasoconstriction. So naturally, as we start to exit the cold, even at like normal temperature, I would say probably waiting like 1 to 3 minutes to not induce any type of like shock to the system. You also, during that time, if you're having shivering, that's actually really good too. So studies are showing that actually helps to transfer like white fat to brown fat. So brown fat is going to be our more metabolically active fat source. So it's going to be burning more calories just at like rest. So that's a really imperative time that you're kind of giving your body the ability to kind of downregulate into that state. And then from there, introducing heat, now you're causing vasodilation. So it's almost working naturally like as a pump with our physiological changes that are happening from the environment.
And one of my reads of the studies around cardiovascular health is that vasodilation, the increase in heart rate, are some of the contributing factors behind why we might say your cardiovascular risk comes down with sauna usage. Not dissimilar to exercise. Like I talk about like zone 2 cardio sitting on your butt. It's sort of what's going on in the sauna. It's like an exercise mimetic essentially, right? It almost like mimics that, and you're burning the calories of that too when you're in the sauna. So that's something super interesting too, and obviously no to low impact. So I think that's huge. What are some barriers that you hear from patients or objections to using sauna and cold plunge, or just questions that people have that might kind of keep them from getting started? I think the controversy like amongst like, what do I do? Like, I think they're just intimidated by the idea in general, like that simple like barrier to entry. Like, what does this look like? This feels like expensive. Like, how much is this actually helping me? How much do I need this? I think when we talk about just like in general, like cardiovascular health, dementia, like all these benefits that it has on like a larger scale, I think a lot of patients are numbers and like metrics driven. Like I was just looking at your watch and we were talking about this. Like I talk a lot about HRV. Do you know much about this? I would love for you to explain it. Perfect. So I'll talk a little bit about it. So HRV is a metric that I refer to a lot in our space. So it's going to be heart rate variability. So it's going to tell us a lot about our body's ability to shift in between like a sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system state, which is oftentimes what we're playing with when we talk about hot and cold exposure too, tapping into those states. So when we have that natural cortisol. And high is good here, right? High is good. High HRV? Yeah. High is good. Yep. Right. So goal for most patients, just like average, we definitely want to see that like higher than like 60-ish, depending on like different factors like age, gender, all of that as well. But that's our goal, is to see that on the incline for sure. So what that's telling us is it's telling us our body has a really good, it's like adaptable to change, and that we're able to switch from sympathetic nervous system state during the day. So when we wake up, that we have that natural cortisol awakening response. We're kind of marching out in that sympathetic nervous system state throughout the day. We're getting things done. We're tasking. We're multitasking. We're taking care of kids, the whole bit. And then as we go to bed, we want to shift into that parasympathetic nervous system state. So that's when our body shifts from fight to flight to rest and digest. We get all of that restorative sleep. We're able to go through like detoxification process, autophagy at like a cellular level. So that's when all like the really good restorative methods happen. So HRV, when it's low, it's basically telling us that we're constantly in that fight or flight state. Like we're unable to get out of that. So my high adrenal patients, my high stress patients, they're living in that headspace. And even though they're sleeping 8 hours a night, they're not actually getting that restorative deep sleep. So we talk Sleep's a really interesting thing with hot and cold. It's actually the reason my wife finally got over her hurdle of doing it. She does not like cold water. Like 80-degree water at the beach is cold for her. And so obviously cold plunge was not so exciting to her. And when she finally came to Framework, we have an 8 sleep at home, and her stats were just off the chart good in terms of her sleep quality the night after being there. And you know, it's well known that sauna, particularly late in the day, is a great thing to do before bed. I take a hot shower because I don't have a sauna at home at 10 o'clock at night. But, you know, you're sort of heating your body up and allowing it to cool. That's one thing going on. And then I think sort of the accumulation of some of the HRV stats between both hot and cold, you know, can lead to really good sleep. And so going back to the point that you made, the way that I sort of explain the benefits and the reason to, you know, yes, cost, but also time, which it's, you know, often can feel just as hard to budget for, is you're going to feel good coming out. It's almost physiologically impossible to not do so with the dopamine and adrenaline points that we were making, and feeling your nervous system reset. Like that's a little harder to measure sometimes, I feel like, but you sort of know when you're relaxed and when you're on edge. Like it feels good to
Definitely.
walk out and just have relaxed a little bit. And so you're feeling good coming out of this, and you're making these sort of long-term investments in your health and contributing to good sleep or maybe recovery if you're training for something. And so I think that stacking of all those benefits, which by the way, you can get while having a very social interaction, right? Like you can go catch up with your bud or your partner in a sauna or make a new friend in a sauna the same as you would over coffee or a drink. And so I think the ability to like have a social interaction, feel good leaving it for healthy reasons, and be working at reducing long-term chronic disease risks. Like that's my pitch of like why make that time or financial investment.
Tell me a little bit more about like the social impact and like how that potentiates the results. And
So I have a physician friend who, upon reading the research about, in particular, the Alzheimer's and dementia risk reduction, her commentary on the study was, I'm not sure I even know how to separate the difference between the heat benefit and the social benefit of just sitting in the sauna. Like we know that loneliness has this very deteriorative effect to your physical health. And so I love, Framework is set up for essentially large format social saunas. Like all of us in this room and then some could sit in one together. And there's nothing to do but sit there and sweat. So you're just going to start chatting with somebody. And by the way, you don't have your phone. So that social interaction is of high quality.
Yeah.
And that's just good for us. It's a little hard to measure, but we kind of all know it.
Yeah.
That it feels good, that it feels necessary and connective to holistic health. And so, it's another one of these that maybe like doesn't totally show up in the lab markers, certainly in a short-term basis, but the ability to sort of bundle a quality social interaction on top of doing something good for your health is a little rare, because otherwise it's just like kind of hard to be chatty in those like fitness settings.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
Or like you're out of breath, or you're like interrupting the yoga class or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Should we talk about some of these biomarkers here?
Let's do it.
So what's in the panel that we're going to talk about here, and sort of why is measuring that important? So maybe like, what's the marker? Why is measuring it important? And what do we either know scientifically or suspect about why sauna or cold plunge would move that marker?
Yeah, we can probably just start with cortisol, because I know that's like the big hitter right there. But like we kind of said, cortisol is associated with kind of shunting our fuel into the appropriate places for usage. So cortisol is going to be the first responder with any type of like immediate like danger or perceived stress to the body. So it can be good or bad. But the way that we kind of talked about like stress resilience, we can see cortisol come down over time with repeated and controlled stressors. So I think that's the biggest thing that we're kind of looking for when we talk about cortisol from this experience, is that we can see baseline what our cortisol's at. Typically speaking, we like to draw this lab like early-ish in the morning, so we can see that gentle awakening or cortisol awakening response. So we're going to be able to see benefits in that, hopefully bringing it down a bit after repeated exposures.
So essentially lowering the baseline.
Lowering the baseline. Yep. So that's a big one with cortisol. That's an easy grab. And then we talk a little bit about like CRP. So that's a C-reactive protein. It's going to be like an acute protein responder released by the liver. It's going to be in defense to like inflammation, injury, or illness. So those are the 5 I's that are associated with CRP. So a lot of times when we talk about cardiovascular health, it's not necessarily the fact that we even have like plaque or cholesterol. Yes, that's important. That's going to be like the next step or the next big player, but it's the fact that we have inflammation in our lining of our vessels. And that's the more dangerous, in my opinion, factor that we need to take into consideration.
And with CRP, I've often been told, you could show up, and if you've got early stage of an illness that you're not aware of, like that might spike it and sort of skew the results, because that's not what we're testing for.
Right.
And the same thing with like, if you did a hard workout that morning, you're going to skew that with a short-term basis. So we want to try to avoid catching those things, like be healthy, maybe don't work out that morning that you're testing. And then that way, without those more acute inflammation aspects obscuring the results, we can tell what the sort of steady state baseline is.
Exactly.
Is that a reasonable understanding?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep. And so CRP can be kind of like a vague marker when we talk about just like generalized inflammation, systemic inflammation.
Yeah.
It could be influenced by several things like you were talking about. I was reading studies too that talk about how sauna and cold plunge, specifically for people who have elevated CRP, like 3 or higher, ideally, or an optimal value would be under 1.
Yeah.
They see the biggest response in those patients for driving down CRP with contrast therapy.
Yeah.
So I think that's a cool value to look a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the idea that it can help people who maybe need to move it the most is great. That it's not that it's counterindicated, rather than it's the most helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we're taking through our list. What else do we have?
All right, we have DHEA.
All right.
So this is going to be a steroid hormone. It's going to be a precursor for like our sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, if it's going down like the steroid like pathway and how it's broken down and metabolized. So DHEA and cortisol kind of have like an inverse relationship. So as we age naturally, we have diminished DHEA levels as we age. So the goal is to increase stress resilience and optimize DHEA over the lifespan. And that can drive down cortisol levels over time.
And do we have a theory on how hot and cold might help with sustaining or increasing those levels?
That's a great question.
Okay.
Good. And I could totally check my notes on that and then let you know.
Do you want to check your notes and we'll ask you that again?
Yeah, I do.
Because I actually am curious.
No, DHEA.
Is DHEA the same reason that like I don't have any hair? Isn't there a relationship there too?
Sometimes it can be because it can lead to like male pattern hair loss.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
So
I thought
here's
I heard
the
it show up
crazy
there.
thing. So it kind of goes like further than that. So when we talk about DHEA being broken down into like estrogen and testosterone, testosterone can take a pathway that's like almost like toxic testosterone. It becomes like overly potent, and that's called DHT.
Okay.
So sometimes for my males that have some of those more dramatic like hair loss, mood swings, anger, irritability, they're kind of shuffling things down the DHT pathway from DHEA, testosterone, so on and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good question. Let's see.
I'll let you check your notes.
We said, oh yeah, that's good. So DHEA helps to maintain core temperature stability. So it's like an adaptive response, decreases inflammation, decreases cortisol. So it's kind of an indirect impact on the HPA axis and stress and yada yada.
Great. I'll ask you that question again.
Yeah, cool.
So with DHEA, we want to, as we age, sustain that, if not increase it. Is there sort of a theory of the case of why hot and cold may be able to contribute to doing that?
Yeah, great question. So with DHEA, it's oftentimes, like we talked about, inversely related with cortisol. So right off the bat, it's going to drive down those cortisol levels.
Yeah.
We really don't want chronic cortisol down.
Okay.
In controlled experiences with like hormesis, like these protocols are having, that's going to be something that's going to build resilience over time. DHEA is kind of acting the same way. It's going to support adaptive immunity. It's going to support just like overall vitality.
Yeah.
It's just going to be really strong in that.
So the more that we're sort of putting some of these good stressors on our body, we're causing our body to have to manage function across a wider range of temperatures.
Yes.
Maybe some of the contributing factors.
Yeah. So the kind of your body to fight to be in what's called like homeostasis. That's where DHEA is going to shine. Yeah.
Very separate from the science point here, but one of the observations I made when I got into working on framework was how much of our lives we spend in this incredibly narrow temperature band. We were talking about how my air conditioner went out yesterday.
Yeah.
The temperature in my house went to 77 degrees. That is a temperature at which the human body functions totally fine.
Yeah.
And my entire family, myself included, felt very uncomfortable. And so I think that's just emblematic to how much, and like go back to caveman woman days,
right.
You would have these massive swings of like very warm during the day and very cool at night. And we live our lives in like a 5-degree temperature band. And so I just had this observation that like our bodies are designed to operate and maybe optimized to operate or operate better.
Absolutely.
By swinging many more degrees than like day-to-day life causes. And so that's another reason that I just, without having to get into a ton of science, it's like, it's probably good for your body to experience a wider range. And like you walk in the door at Framework and you can be between 35 degrees and 190. That is clearly more than we would swing like moving around in an office and a house and a car.
Definitely.
Do we have any markers left?
We do have markers left.
All right.
So CMPs are going to be a metabolic panel. It's going to tell us a little bit about liver enzymes, kidney function, electrolyte balance. So that's a huge one when we talk about just like volume of like sweat loss and like how do we replenish that. I know that you were kind of telling me that it's protocol for you all to like introduce an element packet. I think that's huge when we talk about just especially athletes too that are sweating a certain amount. You should replenish like 500 milligrams to a gram of sodium per like each liter lost. In sweat, I know that's a little bit of a harder determinant to measure, but just keeping that in mind.
There are companies that are working on measuring the composition of your sweat. I've seen some that it's a patch and then it'll tell you your balance of electrolytes across sodium, potassium, magnesium, what's lost, and then help you find an electrolyte packet that might be more in balance to line up against that. But I think, that's probably a hyper optimization. I think the point I'm hearing from you is if you sweat a bunch, yes, add water. For sure do that. Please. But probably also, consider some sort of electrolyte addition back to that.
Definitely.
Because there's a deficiency if you're not doing both.
Exactly, right. Because we all know like our sweat can be salty, right? So if we're not adding at least a little bit of sodium back in there, we're messing with like the ability for like the fluid balance in the body. And that's a huge thing, right? That can play into just like our blood pressure, the function of our internal organs. They all optimize at like within a certain balance of these electrolytes and pH levels. So that's huge. We talk about just like vascularity benefits with the sauna and cold plunge. You get to see that with like liver detoxification, increasing blood flow to the liver. That's huge. And just kidneys working appropriately as like a major detoxification and filtration system.
Yeah. Amazing. Do we have more markers?
We do. We keep going.
Let's keep going.
Keep going. In the CMP, you'll also get a little bit of feedback on just like fasting glucose levels. So once again, as we talk about just like the immediate stress of something like this, we can have our blood glucose levels rising. And then as these markers start to regulate over the course of the couple hours following these stressors, we can shunt the blood sugar appropriately into like the places that it needs to be, either like fat or muscle. So watching our blood sugar, fasting blood sugar decrease with this process is something else we'll keep an eye on too. Insulin would be the next thing. So insulin's going to be a peptide, I know, buzzword, that's released from the pancreas, the beta cells. So that's going to be really important for being like that shuttle and stewardess of the glucose, putting that into the right place.
One of the areas about the health benefits of cold plunge that I think needs to be much better studied is this brown fat conversation. My read, so people tend to talk about it as metabolically active and read like, oh, I'm going to burn more calories. So like, I'm going to cold plunge my way to like burning calories and losing weight. My understanding is like, it's a very small percentage of your body fat for a very short period of time that's going to be in that state. So you're probably not burning a meaningful number of calories. However, it seems like there is some evidence that it does impact some of these metabolic pathways around insulin and glucose. Is that consistent with your understanding? And to me, if so, that's maybe one of the most interesting benefits. I haven't seen a study that like really understands this at a deep level, but if indeed we can build and sort of transform our fat stores from white fat to brown fat, and that being more metabolically active, and that can help manage a lot of our metabolism driven issues, of which like nearly everything is downstream, right? Like see the benefits from GLP-1s. That feels really powerful. What do we know?
So definitely, like you said, it's going to be like the more thermogenic fat, the brown fat. I did read a statistic that spells out specifically like how many more calories that it is like essentially using. I think
it's not zero, so you're burning more.
That's true. We're doing great. This is a great first step.
Get yourself through the first 30 seconds of a cold plunge by knowing that you're burning more calories.
In your head, like, okay, no, this is good for me. But I think like we kind of talked about, it's just like putting the glucose and putting the fuel in the right place. I think that's automatically the biggest thing that I talk to patients about too, when I'm just like big scale. Are we eating enough to support our basal metabolic rate.
Yeah.
That's huge. So we have an InBody here that will just explore like body composition. Yeah. So it's really helpful for my patients to actually see like not only lean muscle mass, fat mass, but also how is my body using calories? Right. Like what's the minimum amount that I need to just exist and go through like cellular function. Yeah. So that's huge for me. I think that's a really big thing when we start talking about like athletes or even like cutting GLP-1s, like are we meeting our metabolic demands from just like a basic level? Yeah. And then we can start to talk about like, okay, how do we layer in some of the other things that work in our favor? Yeah. So then we kind of get to like macro breakdown and like what that looks like. But putting glucose in the right place. If we're overfueling and have nowhere to put it and we're not using it, that's when we start to see the metabolism become more sluggish, inflammation pick up in the body. So I think it's just appropriately matching the inputs to the outputs.
Yeah. It's probably my number one, if you're a researcher out there, research request for studies around cold plunge is to better understand the metabolic health benefits of brown fat. I think we've demonstrated that cold and actually heat too, oddly, but like extreme temperature can transform white fat to brown fat. We understand that you can rebuild it as an adult through this usage. And we understand that it has some benefit relative to glucose and insulin and metabolic health. I think it stops short of saying, here's exactly what that does. This is the protocols that lead us to doing that better. But it feels like it's scratching at something very interesting.
I agree.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are going to watch this and say, I would love to have a conversation like that with my doctor, with my medical practice. And if you've ever been to a practice like STAT and compared that to like your basic medical interaction, I know for me, once I started doing that, it was just a night and day experience that conversations like this for 15 or 20 minutes as compared to 2 minutes are even possible. What does that look like at STAT? And maybe just explain a little bit more about how the medicine and the movement interact. Because I was not familiar with any group that combined those two. And I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's super unique. And that was one of the things that drew me to STAT in the first place, was finding something that just brought both of my passions to the same place under the same roof. And I think they do go hand in hand. They complement one another. I think, Western medicine has really leaned a lot on like medications, which has been like heavy with medications. And I think people are looking for a better answer than that. I think they want to understand the root cause. They want to know why their body's experiencing this. They want to figure out how can I change from like a lifestyle dietary perspective that's going to make like a huge impact on like longevity across, I call it a health span rather than a lifespan, right? I want to optimize the time that I do have. And what can I do to do that? Is there something I can do on a day-to-day basis? Just like morning sunlight. Like getting morning sunlight, boosting mood, resetting circadian rhythm. So your first visit with me looks like a sit down. We kind of go through all things chronologically from birth to current day, get a really good idea of things that have impacted us like socially, emotionally, medically, that have maybe shaped or formed some of the experiences and symptoms that we're experiencing. And then going from there, compiling like a really in-depth exclusive lab panel specifically for the patient standing in front of us. And then reviewing those biomarkers with your provider, sitting down, going through it. And then everything downstairs reflects everything that we teach up here. So we're really focused on progressive overload. We're really focused on functional movements that are going to build muscle, because muscle is going to be that number one determinant of like longevity, number one driver of longevity. So at all costs, we're protecting the muscle. So I think that's a really good thing and a new thing for our patients too, where we've been in such like a loss mindset. Like everything's been like calorie deficit, intermittent fasting. And so I'm trying to really shift the mindset for my patients that like, hey, we need to be meeting these metabolic demands or we're actually doing the opposite to our metabolism. Like we're shifting that to a gain mindset. Like I want to gain muscle. I want to be stronger. So I think those are things too. And people are really like having eye-opening experiences about like, wow, there's small things I can do on a day-to-day basis that are going to impact my health in like a really big way. So
the thing that I love, I sort of developed this line that was basically like, it never makes sense to me that the version of health that is about staying healthy and becoming healthier is handled in the same setting that when there's something wrong with you, it's treated. And because all the behaviors that are in this, let's call it the preventative health bucket, look far more like the places that you go every day to fulfill those preventative health needs. What do you eat? How do you move? How do you sleep? Things like sauna and cold plunge. So the idea of co-location, like I feel like my doctor should be at the place that I eat or the place that I work out.
Yeah.
And you guys have literally done that. And that's what I really love about the model. Well, thanks for spending time and letting me sort of grill you on the biomarkers. If you guys are interested, Stat Wellness here in Berry Hill, Framework in Wedgwood, Houston, and East Nashville. For Framework members, we've got a special partnership with Stat with a discount on all of their a la carte services. If you're a Stat member, you get a discount off Framework memberships. And we have the sauna and cold plunge lab panel that we've just sort of talked through the details on, that you'll get a baseline blood draw. You'll hopefully understand all of those biomarkers after this conversation, and then be able to measure that again after a few months of usage, just sort of see how things have moved, which is really the way that we want to kind of understand our bodies. So Mallory, thanks so much for the time again.